Thank you for joining us. I'd like to first thank Poniexpo 2022 for hosting me in Phoenix, Arizona here today. It was a bit of a drive for me, but fortunately not out of state. Thus, I was able to attend. And also, a big thank you to Bronny Buck for cluing me in on the advertising. The topic I want to discuss with you all here today is My Little Pony and the Bible, as the panel title suggested. And before I get into all that, I, of course, as an evangelical pastor, would be remiss if I didn't start by basing what I'm talking about with the Bible. That's what I consider my authority on matters such as morality, ethics, and, as you're going to see, also reasons for entertainment. This is 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1, or let's start in verse 4. It says, "For every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused, if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer." Now, the immediate and historical context of that passage was discussing food offered to idols, as well as the controversy surrounding the Galatian church. It was a region of Asia Minor, what we call today Turkey. And they were getting their britches all in a bustle about the idea of you not observing kosher laws. And Paul the Apostle, who was a Pharisee of Pharisees, he was more Catholic than the Pope as far as Judaism is concerned, he pointed out to them that as far as the revelation of Jesus Christ is concerned, the food isn't the issue. His teaching was it's not what goes into a man's body that defiles him, it's what comes out of his heart. So in emphasizing this, Paul takes that authoritative statement from the Messiah away by saying, food isn't the issue, the heart in which you receive it is. And I'm taking this a step further and saying that anything I take into my system, whether it's my mouth, my nose, my ears, my eyes, if it is cleansed, literally sanctified, cleansed and set aside for a new purpose, by the word of God in prayer. And if you've followed the YouTube ministry, you're familiar with that passage. I cite it a lot. But noting as well, as a Bible-believing evangelical Christian and a pastor, I have two responsibilities that come with my worldview, and I value consistency as well as honesty. You can guess who I think is best pony. If I honestly believe there is something greater than myself as the foundation of ethics and the source of everything good, to quote Brian Regan, I don't want to keep all that goodness to myself. I want as many people to know about it and understand it from my perspective and experience. This isn't coercion, it's simply an offer of information and hopefully in reflection with reality. That's honesty and consistency. This is where meaningful communication is going to take place, as well as a fair standard in how I approach everything in life. In this case, a specific source of entertainment for myself and many others. What I intend to communicate with all of you is, of course, how I approach the things that entertain me with the biblical worldview in mind, and giving you the opportunity to enjoy the things we already do for more reasons. I also use that as a place of common ground to enjoy other things I do for the same reasons that we enjoy our sources for entertainment, say, for example, the Bible. So, in summation of everything we're going to talk about, my 3 points are going to be these. First, my methodology, how I approach My Little Pony with the Bible in mind. My means, how I go about communicating biblical parallels with people who don't share your worldview. Am I like, Always Sunny in Philadelphia? It's like, it's all connected, Lauren Faust is a Christian. No, that's not my means. And then, of course, my motivation. Why would I want to find parallels with My Little Pony and the Bible? And no, the answer isn't because I'm a furry. The first point is methodology. What are my standards for how I approach what I enjoy? People who share my worldview are going to have a common appreciation for the Bible, but maybe not necessarily My Little Pony. All I'm doing is using that point of agreement to appreciate something new about the show. If you already call yourself a Christian, then you can tack on to that the Christian themes in My Little Pony. If you're already a brony, then people can say, well, I love the characters, I love the storytelling, and the overall format of the show. But appreciating and sharing my worldview will make the communication easy because I'm only adding one more reason for the show to enjoy than what's already there. You share my brony in it, my bronydom, and you can have that common ground for Christianity and vice versa. But I also know that not everyone is like me. In fact, I'm the only one like me. Otherwise, we'd just be called they. My approach and methodology towards those who don't share my worldview, and this is largely the reason for the YouTube ministry and evangelism, is that if you don't believe the Bible is something to be appreciated, we still have something we can agree on. My Little Pony is a good show. We can talk about that and share our reasons for enjoying the show on an individual basis. A disagreement as to who is best pony and what's the most meaningful episode, to you all comes back to communication and persuasion, which is basically narrowed down to 4 topics. First is a definition, what I mean. Are we talking about the same My Little Pony? Is it Generation 4? Is it Lauren Faust and Megan McCarthy and, fill in the names and stuff? Or do I mean something entirely different? We need to make sure what I'm talking about is the same thing. Second is the illustration. What we can both understand, noting that common ground, to describe what I mean. If I just list off a bunch of facts, you're going to think I'm a college professor speaking to, a little TED Talk thing. But if I'm illustrating it, I'm making it more relevant to you. And it's a spoiler alert for the 4th point. The third point in communication and persuasion is going to be application. Not just what I mean, not just how I understand what I mean, but how what I mean impacts real life. In this case, our sources for entertainment. And then finally, relevance, what this means to us personally. That with all of these things in mind, I now can understand that there is something to this that makes a difference in my life. Not just the fact that you have this position, but this impacts the way I can now view the show, given your worldview and my agreements of it. So whether you share my worldview or not, the methodology is at least fair, hopefully. Now, an example of this is, again, we're both bronies, but not necessarily Christians. We don't have to be as long as one of those 2 things exists. If there's a common ground, if I'm talking to a Christian who wants to know, why do you watch a show intended for little girls? I can first definition, what it means to be a brony. Then use the Christian ethics that are portrayed in the show to illustrate how the 2 can be intertwined, or at least a parallel. Once those ethics are explained in their proper context, both within the show and our scriptures, the common ground, then I make My Little Pony relevant for a Christian because we both regard our scriptures. Now, on the other hand, if I'm talking to a non-Christian who wants to know why I'm a Christian, I can first define what it means to be a Christian. If you don't know what that means, then it's not going to really make much sense for me to say, I'm this. Then, once we use our shared application for the moral themes and positive character traits expressed in the show to show how we have more in common than we realize, you like the same things in the show that I like about Jesus, then those parallels will then be explained in their proper context within our favorite show and my scriptures. So notice, you don't have to be a Christian to grasp these points. The emphasis that we need to make is that to make Christianity relevant to a brony or to a Christian is that we start with common ground. And the Apostle Peter made the same point. This is his first letter. In chapter 3 and verse 13, he says, Who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, this is speaking in the 1st century where Christians were a persecuted minority, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled, but sanctify. For those of you just joining us, sanctify means to cleanse and set aside for a new purpose. The Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks a reason for the hope that is within you, with meekness, not weakness. Meekness, by the way, in relevance to My Little Pony, is actually a term used to describe a perfectly trained war horse. It's strength under control. And fear, not in temerity like Fluttershy Season 1, but respect in regards to, I'm not going to mess with that rattlesnake because I'm aware it can poison me if I agitate it. That when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. So notice Peter's first 2 assumptions. There will be people challenging your worldview, and that you will have reasons for the hope that is within you. That's the definition of faith. Not blind belief, but literally in Greek, pistis, trust with reason, based on the reasons. And note, you can have bad reasons to believe something, but the point of emphasis always needs to be that. If someone is going to harass you for something you believe, whether it's I enjoyed the show or I love Jesus, hopefully both, you can still come on a common ground and answer reasonably why I do this. And if it associates you with the Bible, well, I know some Christians would have a problem with it. Hopefully most consistent and honest ones won't have an issue with that. So regarding methodology, again, the standards for how I approach what I enjoy. Hopefully that's been fair to those of you who are joining us. Going on then to the means, the people who share my worldview, if I can properly establish a shared definition, then all that's required of me to do, and you'll see this in the studies that I literally have reams of notes of papers going all the way from episode 1 to 9, and some side character studies as well. I like some of the side characters. But the point being made is, if I can establish a definition, when we understand what Christianity is, if we understand what My Little Pony actually is, because note, both have a tendency of being misrepresented in popular media, we can then walk them through the illustration and the application because they're using the right formula for the equation. All I need to persuade someone who sees things the same way I do is to view it properly to begin with. All I need to do is clarify my definition. Some people don't want to exert the effort to entertainment beyond being entertained, but that's okay. My goal is only to establish my own reasons, and if that's the common ground, no one's going to shame me for being an individual. But if on the other hand I take a step back and go, okay, is my view as an individual consistent with reality? That's the goal of the persuasion. All I need to do to fall down that, steep decline is first properly define what Christianity is, what My Little Pony is. And if I can show the two are essentially the same thing on an episode by episode or character by character point, it's going to be easier. My argument, my means isn't My Little Pony is the Bible. My point is, like parallel lines, they never touch, but they are pointed the same direction. And if that's in fact the case, then I can make a case to relevance with the illustration of My Little Pony and with the application of Christianity, as long as both are properly defined. Persuasion starts with definition. Likewise, for those who don't share my worldview, again, if I can properly define what Christianity is, then I can guide them through illustrations and applications the same way someone would already be doing if they had the worldview. I have to exert a little bit more effort. It's not downhill, it's more level. But I don't necessarily have to convert somebody in order for them, and this is my goal, to at least see something the way that I do. If I define my terms and they say, that's what I mean, then they'll fill in the application for me. That's all that's required. An example of this would be that someone with a false view of Christianity or an uninformed view of the Bible won't see how My Little Pony parallels with it because they don't know what it's being compared to. Likewise, someone who has an uninformed view of My Little Pony wouldn't associate it with the Bible because they wouldn't know what it's being compared with because they don't know it, right? Even if the term, again, parallel needs a definition. If parallel means lines that go the same direction but never touch, they're simply going the same example of belief that I'm basing this on. A good example of this would be Feeling Pinky King. Those of you remember in season 1, Lauren Faust ironically got in a bit of hot water because they thought, oh, is she putting forward a Christian message because she keeps using this word belief? And people like me were emphasizing terms like faith as being synonymous. Now, no, like me, not me. Listen to the study. But the point being made is this. The episode Feeling Pinky King didn't define Christian faith as it's presented in a biblical worldview. But it did give people an example of belief based on trust as a legitimate way to form conclusions. For instance, just like a non-Christian would recognize Twilight's purely empirical, for those of you who don't speak fancy, empirical means as pertains to what you can interact with in the 5 senses. Her view of truth brought her to a point where she was denying reality and putting herself in danger as a result. So, a Christian would benefit from understanding that Pinky's twitch wasn't something ponies regarded without good reason. That's faith, trust with reason. The caution, also note for Twilight's example, was against an improper view of faith that offers an illustration in explaining the Greek word pistis in action. Is that all clear? And if you want to take home the notes on Feeling Pinky King, I have the copy with me right in there somewhere. Again, the videos are available online, but you can just ask and I can send them to you in full PDF. We'll note more if you guys have time for Q&A. Also note, third and final point for motivation, to the people, again, who share my worldview, why am I doing these things? things. I started the message by noting the call is for consistency. And in sharing my worldview, they regard the Bible as authoritative for how they ought to live their life because of what the historical resurrection of Jesus demonstrated. They're living in light of his commands because he has convinced both of us that he's an authority with weight behind him for metaethics, that is the source of right and wrong. In going to our shared scriptures, remember I'm talking about those who share my worldview, I encourage them to make Jesus more and more a part of their lives so they can enjoy him more and more. The Bible uses the word extort, which is kind of an old English word, but it means to build someone up in knowledge. Who God is, so we don't forget what matters or get distracted by things that don't. The author of Hebrews said this in chapter 3 and verse 12. Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin, for we have become partakers of Christ. Note the shared worldview is the assumption. If we hold the beginning of our confidence, trust with reason, note that, steadfast to the end, while it is said, and he quotes the Old Testament, this is the book of Deuteronomy, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. So note that point. My motivation is to build my fellow Christians up in knowledge as my scriptures command. If we both take those seriously, they'll welcome another opportunity, because one way or another we're going to try to seek entertainment. What better way than to shove Jesus into it, right? And especially if he fits. That's also important. But what about those who don't share my worldview? And on top of exhortation, this would be more what's called evangelism. The call, again, is for consistency on my part personally. In my worldview, God has demonstrated his existence, and his feelings towards us is that of love. And note, he has the right to define what those two words mean. He wants a relationship with us, but since we all have done things to sever our relationship with him, great or small, he has sought a just, a fair means of redemption through a historically verifiable resurrection from the dead. If you guys want that evidence, the Q&A session is intended for that. I have received that reconciliation, this is me personally, and now have hope for the afterlife, as well as peace in this life. That's not something I want to keep to myself. If I consider Jesus my Lord, I want to model him in his nature any way I can. And that, instead of being a bad Christian and just calling myself a term, but living out the opposite way, I want people to see what Jesus is like through me. I want to model him. God the Son came to this world wanting people to know him and to understand how much he loved them. If they didn't want anything to do with him, he left them alone. If they claimed to follow him but made themselves obstacles between people knowing him personally, he had words for them. And if they wanted to know they wanted to know him more, he freely offered himself without compromise or contradiction. I want to do the same. For example, Jesus used parables or illustrative stories to make himself accessible to people who may not have understood him if he just started up in seminary. But they did understand things like farming and financial investments. The same thing we're doing today. This is just another parallel. In clarifying who Jesus is, my motivation is the same as my Lord's. I love you, and I want you to know God more, even through the things you may not have looked at as having something in common with him. So to recap all of these things, what is my definition? God loves you and wants a personal relationship with you forever. That love was explained and demonstrated not as good feelings or affirmation, but a personal sacrifice for the unworthy to their ultimate benefit. My illustration is that My Little Pony, Generation 4 specifically, without a single exception, and I have documentation to prove that, illustrates the same themes and upholds the same characteristics that God emphasizes in his revelation of himself to this world in history. My application is that through that common ground, you can understand what Jesus' claims were through what already appeals to you in your sources of entertainment, and this is what makes it all relevant. If you love My Little Pony, you're going to love Jesus. If you already love Jesus, you're going to have one more reason to enjoy My Little Pony. So with that said, that's all I had prepared. So I'll open the rest of the time up for Q&A. As far as the clockwork is concerned, I can't see some from the angles here. But we have till 11, and again, if the time notes, that just means that I can take up less time.
Got about a half hour extra.
Awesome. So, 50-50 split between my time talking and me clarifying what you guys are talking about. So, do you guys have any questions about what's been discussed, any episodes in particular you'd like to discuss, or anything that's been discussed you want clarification on? Hi there.
No, you can handle this thing.
Oh, and while you're thinking of questions, the table in the back over there is key for Ministries at my local church. If you want the number for my church, the 2 cards there are listed under Bo Ouellette. He's the guy who founded Running Light Ministries. We also have books available as well. They're workbooks for things like sexual purity, things like dealing with suffering, the problem of evil, and of course just pamphlets to let you know more about what our church puts out.
We'll definitely take a selection of them. Would you be interested in joining a Christian Brony server?
The question was, would I be interested in joining a Christian Brony server? Anything that's offered to me, I will accept, as long as, of course, not only obviously I'm being welcomed, but my perspectives are non-denominational Christianity and Orthodox. If I get into squabbles with people, I will, of course, will abide by the rules, but if there is a compromise in doctrine, I will talk about it. So if that's against the rules, just be aware of that. I'm a polemicist at heart.
I don't think that will be an issue at all.
Awesome.
Let's see.
Well, noting the Discord server for Poniexpo was able to access my name, you can send the invite there. And also note for those listening, the YouTube ministry, Shady Oak Ministries, also has a Discord link if you want it to just ask in the comments.
I'll take that too.
Awesome. Favorite episodes or characters, questions for me, what was discussed?
Favorite character is Nightmare Moon. Favorite elements, definitely, honestly.
That the what was it, the Starlight Glimmer Alternate Futures, where Nightmare Moon 1 was an entertaining one for you.
That was great. I loved the cameo.
And Daybreaker, that was a
such good
fanboy
news.
moment.
What was your take on the Daybreaker episode?
Oh boy, what was the title and season?
That
If
is
you
a good
could catch
question.
this? I have obviously the notes with me, but this is the nature of paper. That was a Royal Problem Part 2. That was Season 7, Episode 10. I started with Hebrews 4 through 16, that Jesus is our high priest, willingly and voluntarily subjected himself to our weaknesses, and because of that he has a level of understanding. I went through the history lesson of what Yom Kippur was all about. That was actually a few weeks ago. The Day of Atonement was when the high priest would literally go into, not the temple, they did that every day, but the Holy of Holies, the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, and offer a spotless lamb as an offering for the sins of the entire nation on the mercy seat. And what was interesting about that was there was a lot of trepidation of going into the presence of God, because in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Leviticus, there were examples of people who came to God just casually and unworthy, and they were struck dead. So it wasn't a light thing to come into the presence of God. They were literally consumed by fire in it. What was interesting as well is that in order to prevent people from just wandering in casually, I cited sources from Josephus that noted the curtain that Moses sewed. It had a big angel with a flaming sword on top of it. It's pretty metal. But it was also written, you violate this boundary, this is what you get. God is holy, you are not, so stay back. The curtain, and this is what I noted in my notes, redundancy, was so thick, this is according to Josephus, that you could tie 4 teams of horses to each corner and they wouldn't pull them apart. So this is thick with 2 C's. Now, what was that meant to illustrate? There's a massive distance between God and man, and how serious that distance needs to be respected. The 2 topics I discussed in the episode were what caused that distance, and does God enjoy that arrangement? Now, the distance between us and God, obviously, is through sin, and how that relationship was restored was through his free sacrifice. But the key example I pointed out in Daybreaker, believe it or not, was this is how the world views God. Wrath, fire, judgment, destruction, tyranny. I'm the powerful one, you're not. Whereas Jesus Christ was how God showed himself to us. If I have a picture of God, and if God shows himself to me, what's going to be more accurate? If I look at Daybreaker, it would sound like the kind of precautions the high priest would have to take. You know, oh, mighty fireball, emissary and herald of the sun, do not smite me. I'm on the basis of your mercy. But the question again then needs to be asked, if there is in fact a legitimate Daybreaker status before us in God, then how would he reveal himself to us and not nuke us, right? And that was the point of Jesus' revelation of himself. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Not that God so hated the world, he showed up and gave night and moon what for. You get the point? So the point I applied to that episode was, and this is a quote, to those who think God is some wrathful entity waiting to punish anyone who slightly irks him, doesn't know him. As Celestia said to Daybreaker, you've never existed and you never will. Why? Because we know what God is like, the person of Jesus Christ. It's John chapter 1 and verse 13. We have seen God in history not as an all-powerful tyrant, but a heartbroken father that will give his children every opportunity to come back. If you refuse mercy, that's different. All that's left is judgment. But that's not what he wants. That's what I talked about with Daybreaker.
Interesting.
And so you know, I didn't say God, the high priest, is Daybreaker. I properly defined the biblical perspective and how wrath would be tied in. I noted the New Testament revelation and then made the application in the point of God's grace, but also there being justice. How has it been fixed?
Let's see.
Some of these got printed out of order, so I got like part 2 and part 1 in reverse.
Oops.
And the first part was fun, the biblical message of Starlight, trust your instincts, not a good idea. You know how that went to.
What about season 1, episode 7, Dragon Shy?
Dragon Shy. That remember that one fairly fondly, but let me make sure I can give citations so that don't call me on it. I started with Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage? Do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So again, the word was courage. I defined fear as an emotion. I quoted my father that emotions are good servants, but they're poor masters, and that there's a good and a bad acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real, but also noting as well, Brad Stein made an interesting quote, faith is believing what you cannot see will come to pass. Fear is believing what you cannot see will come to pass. The difference is in motivation. So the example was with Fluttershy. She was motivated by fear throughout the entire episode, where at one point she feared smoke, made everyone, try and warn her from town, but no one listened. 2 minutes later, she was paralyzed by that same fear that was keeping her from flying. Thus, Applejack had to drag her up the mountain. She wouldn't even trust her friends, even to voice a concern on the matter. The question is, if fear can motivate 1 minute and discourage another, then is it a good or a bad thing? And the lesson was, it's not. It's a tool. It depends on the heart of the one using it. So note, courage, demonstrated by Fluttershy, wasn't Fluttershy being fearless. It was, to quote John Wayne, it's being scared out of your mind, but saddling up anyway. So again, the concluding point I made was, if Fluttershy overcame a dragon by focusing on her friends for strength, what can you accomplish when God is your focus and reason for courage? So note, the definition was what fear was.
Right.
The illustration of the episode was fear motivated Fluttershy to do good things, to warn the town, but also motivated her to be a hindrance to the town solving the smoke problem. What ultimately ended up being the change wasn't her lack of fear, but her willingness to focus on someone other than herself, and thus her emotions found their proper place. Good use of fear. Because she didn't fear the dragon, she wouldn't be up on the mountain to begin with. She didn't fear the well-being of her friend, she wouldn't seek to intervene if she didn't, you get it. So note worth adding to get nice nuptials and advertisements. I was able to get lovely lovely etched box produced for easy transport. I was given very generously by one of the individuals in our panel, bookmark that I'll definitely be using on the books. And of course, from Mary, fantastic sunset shimmer etching, which you guys all know, Paul the Apostle Pony.
Season 2, Episode 8, The Mysterious Ne'er-do-well.
Season 2, Episode 122. Party of One. Origins of Pinkamena. That was fun.
Actually, I want to ask about that one, too.
Alright, I will set that aside. And then Eclipsed, Lesson 0. That's one of my favorites. Sisterhood Social. May the best pet win. We're getting warmer.
I do want to ask about 7, too.
Alright. Mysterious Ne'er-do-well and May the best pet win. Oh boy. Alright, I started with 3 verses for that one. Matthew 6, 19 through 21, and 1 John 2, 15 through 27, as well as Galatians 5, 7 through 9. All are emphasizing the point. Matthew's talking about your priorities being in heaven, not on this earth, because this earth is temporary, that one is not, so just for economic reasons, which one's going to last? 1 John 2 talks about not loving the things in the world because the world is passing away, same point. And then Galatians 5 noted, and I'll quote this because it's shorter, "You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven, a little yeast, leavens the whole lump." This is an illustration of sin in the Old Testament. That's why they have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I made the illustration that, again, Rainbow Dash always loving the spotlight, but when it came to doing the right thing, she acted without need for instruction. She did what was right because it was the right thing to do. Good thing, right? And I give biblical applications for that. If you do good things, that is a good thing. But what happens? A little bit of pride, a little bit of self-centered and self-deceptive focus. Yeast, again, is a material mixed in bread through the material dying, causes oxygen to rise and it becomes nice and floofy. But the problem is that Rainbow Dash thought that using a virtue to get herself glory is virtue because it involves it. But note, she was sacrificing virtue to receive praise. Like any drug, one hit's never enough. She always had to outdo herself, and it fed to the point where anyone that stood in the way of her glory, ne'er-do-well, was her enemy. Likewise, in the Bible, pride is described as this sort of anti-joy. And joy, by the way, is not happiness. It's what's literally called hope fulfilled. You set yourself up constantly for this goal, this paragon, this reason and motivation for doing things in life that will never satisfy, that will never pay off. So it's literally like salt water. You're poisoning yourself while thinking you're saving thirst. So again, note, ne'er-do-well arrives. What does she do? Literally the same things Rainbow Dash would have been doing. But what happens? Different attitude. Total anonymity. No glory for me. I got the mask. And what a difference it made. And this was a quote from Levi Lusko. He's a pastor up in Montana. He said, "Pride always backfires, but so does humility." Lower yourself, you'll be exalted, Philippians chapter 2 says. But you raise yourself, you'll be brought down. So again, ne'er-do-well was an example of virtue for virtue, and she got glory and more virtue. Rainbow Dash was virtue for glory, and she got glory or nothing, and eventually an enemy. So that would be the biblical illustration. The main 6 made humbling Rainbow Dash. And by the way, humbling doesn't just mean humiliate. It means to get a realistic picture of yourself again, to restore to reality. And if it's a radical transition, it can be embarrassing. They made that a priority because they didn't want to lose who she was for who she thought she could be. And God wants the same for you, and He provided Himself as the example. And that's what the Carmen Christie's all about, the hymn to Christ. Philippians 2, 3 through 11, if you want to read it. Said, "May the best pet win," and blessings, or party of one, you said?
Best pet win. I think so.
Yeah, all right.
Best pet.
Man, the best pet win obviously was when Tank was introduced. Remember the episode when Tank went into hibernation?
Yes.
That was a great study too. I recommend you listen to that one. But I started with Matthew 20:25, where Jesus told them the Gentiles, people who don't know God, there were Jews and there were non-Jews. That's what Gentile means. Their rulers lord it over them, those who exercise great authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. Whoever desires to be first, let him be your slave. And why? Because just the Son of Man, referencing Daniel 7, the guy who would receive all glory in all things ever, did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. We can go into the Roman historical background of that, how if you didn't flaunt your authority, they kind of made fun of you. You can note that in the literature. But the illustration was this: Rainbow Dash love versus Jesus love. How did Rainbow Dash determine who's worthy of me? Well, how can I, this is Rainbow Dash, gain from this relationship? What can I gain from this relationship? Who can I gain? Who's going to make me look cooler? Jesus would have said, how can I contribute to this relationship? What can I do more in a relationship? Who can I serve more in a relationship? And that's the whole point of 1 Corinthians 13, the second third of verse 5 notes that love, the character of God personified, the definition of love, not affirmation. Love does not seek its own. And that's the key here. The point of a pet is to make someone into a servant, according to Rainbow Dash. Yet what's the whole problem with this is that the one who offered the least ended up giving Rainbow Dash the most. Why? Because that's not what those are about. Worldly relationships will say conditional love, right? I'll do the right thing if you've earned it. All the pets had to pass the tests of, I think it was awesomeness, coolness, and radicalness. And Twilight didn't understand what that meant. That's why she'll never be your pet. But Tank, to Rainbow Dash, regardless of how many times rejected him, modeled a godly relationship. I'm going to do the right thing. Earned it or not, that's irrelevant. I'm going to be what's right, because that's who God is by definition. So what did Tank do when Rainbow Dash was in trouble? Didn't try to win the race, saved her life. What did Tank do when she was rejected? Well, he was still going to be a good pet. Why? Because he loved her. He was going to continue to be a good pet. And that's the whole point with Jesus. If you have the right to say no, you can. But it's not as if he's not showing a consistent picture of his character. People might, but he hasn't. And then you said Party of One?
I think so.
All right, that was the one where Pinky became paranoid and
Yes.
flat-haired about her friends not joining her party and ended up being a misunderstanding. I started with Colossians 3:13, says the Christian imperative, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. Christianity, forgiveness is a priority with good reason, because we are always doing things to each other that need forgiving. And that's why Proverbs 18:1 says, if you isolate yourself, you seek your own desire. You're raging against all wise judgment. So that's not a good thing. And of course, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, even in creation, God said, it is not good that man should be alone. And then said, I'll make a helper comparable to him. So ladies, note, creation wasn't complete without you. But note this point. Pinkie Pie had the gift of bringing a lot of joy to a lot of people by gathering them together. But what happened when she isolated herself? That desire was perverted, literally twisted. It isolated her, drove people away, and made her more miserable. As opposed to compounding joy, it sucked joy from her. So the inversion of isolation was what was being cautioned. And note, again, the key to avoiding insanity is to not alienate yourself from God, which Ephesians 4:17-32, I just read it, goes through. And of course, that corruption is a growth process. The only way to stave it off is the reason why forgiveness is such an imperative, because it can mess you up. People write fan fictions about you, and then Rainbow Dash gets killed or something. You know?
Yeah. Cakes.
I'll look that up, by the way.
No.
Or do. I won't judge. I did a Bible study on that too, by the way.
Really?
Yep. The Christian Message of Grimdark.
I'm interested.
Yeah, I don't have the notes with me. It was a topical, but the point of emphasis I made was in My Little Pony, at least up until that point in the show when I did the study, all the problems were kind of superficial and relationship based, whereas in this life we have much more serious problems.
True horrors.
Yeah, so when we see people in the fan base producing fan fiction that just goes so black it's darker, so dark it's blacker than black, right? You end up showing the kind of longing in our hearts that Romans 8 talks about, that all of creation is groaning for redemption, longing for our redemption even. And noting that human beings are the only ones that look at this world and say, why? It's because we have what's called these echoes of Eden, this mindset of this is not the way they ought to be, when according to the nihilistic evolutionary concept, it's the only way things ever could have been. So why is that? Why do we have this innate longing in our souls for a world that we've never known? And that's the whole point of Grimdark, is people are bringing this quote-unquote perfect world where problems are so relatable and yet at the same time so distant, and bringing them closer, showing just how dark this world really is. Whereas in the Bible, it's the reverse. It shows the world how dark this really is, but gives an authoritative statement of a future where relationship is literally the definition for our existence. And that's what I'm talking to people about.
This actually got me interested in continuing a few of my fics.
Inspiring fan fiction, you heard it here, folks. Instead, he's interested in continuing writing. So, yeah, and again, feel free to take any of these home, but that's all set for questions. I can
I've got
see if
one more.
Yeah, okay.
Season 2, episode 24.
224.
Mystery on the Friendship Express.
Oh, boy. Sherlock Holmes episode?
Yeah.
Super Speedy, Cider Squeezy 6000. That was an easy study. Friend Indeed. Dragon Quest. Should have taken the time to put these in order. Putting your hoof down. Ponyville Confidential, getting warmer. Mystery. Alright, here we go. I started with Proverbs 25 and verse 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings, earthly rulers, is to search out a matter. Proverbs, Hebrew poetry, lives and breathes contrasts. So if they can emphasize a point, they'll find something else to either compare it to or to make sure it's greater than lesser. What I did was noting 3 key facts. First, God is omniscient, meaning he knows everything. I give verse citation for it. God is omnipresent, he's everywhere at once. And God is omnipotent, meaning he can do anything consistent with his nature. He won't violate his own nature. He can't be evil, but he can do anything rational, right? So, if I note this, best way to summarize it is God is the worst person to say no spoilers to, because that's all he is, right? He's been everywhere, he knows everything, and he can do everything, right? But if on the other hand, what's the whole point of mystery? It's the fact that we're not omnipresent. We need to go to places and find out what we weren't there to see. If we don't know everything, we need to find out the clues to see what needs to be understood that we lack in knowledge. And if we can't do something, for example, I don't think I have to illustrate it, but you get the point, train antics, that of course requires help that a earth pony cannot achieve. So again, the mystery of justice is that earthly leaders have to pursue it because God's already there. God's imperative is concealment. He wants mercy. Because if he only sought justice, it would just be all over like that. He doesn't have to do any investigations. If on the other hand, I note in the show, our fallen the law says, this is again the foundation of justice, our fallen nature. The reason why things have to be sought out is that the law says, don't touch the right? The fallen nature says, I'll just wait till nighttime so there's no accountability. The appeal is in rebellion because we're rebels by nature. I give that as the first key fact. The issue isn't that we're not good enough at finding truth, is that there's always one more liar, right? There wasn't just one person hiding about the there were many miscreants. And the most honest thing again is that we can say we're all liars in order to deal with that. That's why confession is the best form of investigation. It does your work for you. It's not that actions, again, need to change the heart and spirit, and the process is, of course, a daily decision, because we're still rebels by nature. just applying the point of a mystery novel and noting the biblical parallel to our lives. The definition was, God is by nature not limited by everything that made the mystery what it was. We are limited not by the fact there's mystery. We're keen on that. We like justice. But we're limited by those faculties and thus have to say, how do we keep these bad people from going after the cakes? And it's not by saying, well, I didn't do anything wrong, because you did. It's by being willing to step up and say, look, I've done something wrong. Can you forgive me? And believe it or not, they could have made another cake. It was that easy. But, of course, we never make it that easy. That's what was worth talking about in that, though. Emphasizing confession, defining divine fiat, or fiat. I don't know the fancy seminary term, but it just means God's.
I've heard it fiat.
Yeah, it's not the car, it's a Latin term that just refers to God's unique attributes and power. He can say, and then it is. God said to light that didn't exist. In Hebrew, in Genesis 1, it was, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He said, let there be light, and there was light. In Hebrew, it's literally, Ior Yahweh Hior. It says, light was God, and light be. So something that didn't exist God went to something that doesn't exist. You exist. And it went, yes, sir. That's divine fiat. But among all those other unique attributes, it's important in apologetics because when you're, say, for example, talking to Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, who would say that Jesus isn't God, Jesus does the sort of things that only God could do. So either Michael's a blasphemous demon, or he's not the Archangel Michael, he's God, very God, because only God could rightly say he's creator, say he's the source of all life, say he's the final judge, say he's the first and the last is my favorite verse, Revelation 1:17. It's a quote from Isaiah 44:6. That's the mindset. But just training those sort of approaches towards Scripture and using my little pony as the illustration. So
That's awesome.
Those kinds of things. All right, well, thank you all for joining us and taking part in this panel. I look forward to many in the future. Thank you again, Poniexpo 2022, for hosting me, and I will see you all again. Hopefully not the too far future, but definitely not tomorrow, because I need to